Today, we're diving into what might be one of history's greatest case studies on leadership. We're talking about Sir Ernest Shackleton's 1914 mission to conquer Antarctica. Now, that mission, it failed catastrophically. But the story of what happened next, that's a lesson in decision-making, raw human endurance, and survival against absolutely impossible odds. So let's start with a number, 28. That's how many men were on this expedition, and that includes a stowaway who actually snuck aboard. They were a team, sure, but they had no idea just how much their lives were about to depend on one another in the most hostile place on Earth.
And then there's this distance, 1,300 kilometers. That's over 800 miles. And that's how far they would eventually have to travel to save themselves, across the most violent, unpredictable ocean in the world, in what was basically a glorified rowboat. But maybe the most powerful number of all is this one, 0. That's how many radios they had. No GPS, no satellite phone, no way to call for help. The second they left civilization, they were completely, utterly on their own. The rest of the world had no idea if they were even dead or alive. So what was the point of all this risk? While the original mission was nothing short of breathtakingly audacious, Shackleton was planning to lead the first ever land crossing of the entire Antarctic continent on foot, a journey of almost 3,000 kilometers right across the South Pole. And this is where you see the massive gulf between the plan and the reality. The plan was a 120-day trek for scientific discovery and glory. The reality? It became a 497-day ordeal where the only goal was to survive until the next sunrise. The mission had to pivot from exploration to a brutal, raw test of psychological survival. You know, it's so important to put yourself in their shoes in that time. I mean, they were navigating with sextants and stars, not GPS. They were wearing wool and canvas against temperatures that could freeze you solid in minutes. And their ship, made of wood, was going up against the crushing power of polar ice. It was a battle against the elements with technology that seems ancient to us. Now, despite some serious warnings from seasoned whalers back on South Georgia Island, Shackleton decided to push on. He was determined to make it. But the Antarctic winter, well, it had other plans, and the expedition was about to face its first and most devastating crisis. On January 18, 1915, just 60 miles from where they were supposed to land, their ship, the Endurance, got trapped. And I don't mean just stuck. It was completely frozen into the dense pack ice of the Weddell Sea. For months, they were prisoners on their own ship, just drifting helplessly wherever the ice decided to take them. After 9 long months, the ice finally won. The Endurance was slowly, violently crushed, its wooden timbers groaning and splintering under the immense force. As the crew abandoned their only home, their only connection to the world they knew, a crewman named Tom McLeod said what everyone was thinking. That quote, it just captures the absolute despair of that moment. The mission was over. The fight for their lives had just begun. So the ship's gone. The 28 men are now stranded on a giant floating piece of ice in the middle of nowhere. This is the moment where Shackleton's real test of leadership truly begins. So just ask yourself this. Your ship, your base, is destroyed. You have 0 communication. You are thousands of kilometers away from anyone who can possibly help you. How in the world do you keep 27 other men from just giving up? How do you maintain any kind of order when there is literally no hope in sight? Well, here's how he did it. This was his mental survival toolkit. Shackleton knew the biggest enemy wasn't the cold or starvation. It was psychological collapse. It was despair. So he fought it by engineering a sense of purpose. He forced a strict daily routine. He gave every single man a job, no matter how small, to fight off the poison of being idle. And he projected this unwavering optimism, acting as a psychological shield for his men, even when he secretly had his own doubts. Survival itself became their new unifying mission. After months of drifting, their ice floe finally broke apart, forcing all of them into 3 small lifeboats. They somehow managed to reach a desolate, uninhabited rock called Elephant Island. But just reaching land didn't mean they were safe. No, it just presented them with an even more impossible choice. Shackleton had to make a life-or-death calculation. The closest options, Cape Horn and the Falklands, meant sailing straight into the Drake Passage, a notoriously violent stretch of water where oceans literally collide. It's a ship killer.
So instead, he chose the longest route, a staggering 1,300 kilometers to South Georgia Island. He was betting that the winds and currents there, while still incredibly dangerous, gave them the slimmest, most logical chance of making it.
And that insane gamble, that was just the first step in a chain of what feel like absolute miracles. First, he and 5 men had to survive that 1,300-kilometer journey in a tiny boat in hurricane-force winds. Then, they landed on the wrong side of the island and had to become the first people in history to cross its treacherous, unmapped mountains, with no climbing gear, just screws from their boat hammered into their boots for grip.
Unbelievably, after a grueling 36-hour trek with no rest, Shackleton and 2 other men stumbled into the Stromness whaling station. They were unrecognizable. Their hair was long and matted, their faces black from soot. But they had made it. The rescue, though, was far from over.
Let's just pause on this number for a second. 497 days. That is how long the crew of the Endurance survived from the moment their ship got trapped until they first stepped on solid ground at Elephant Island. That's nearly a year and a half without seeing land. Just think about that.
And while Shackleton was on that impossible boat journey, the 22 men he left behind on Elephant Island had to survive for 128 more days. Their leader, a man named Frank Wild, kept their spirits up with a simple daily ritual. Every single morning, he'd tell them, "Pack your bags, boys. The boss may come today." After 4 separate attempts, fighting through the ice, Shackleton finally made it back to Elephant Island. And this brings us to the most incredible number in this entire story: 0. After nearly 2 years of unimaginable hardship, not a single life was lost from his crew of 28 men.
So in the end, if you look at the original goal, the expedition was an absolute failure. They never even set foot on the continent they meant to cross. But does that really matter? Or does the fact that Shackleton brought every single one of his men home alive, against all odds, redefine what success even means and make this one of leadership's greatest triumphs? That really is the essential question of his legacy.